short counter? You and Bob at the same time?
It's close. Just being the production.
Okay, we're on.
All right. That being said, I'll call this meeting of the Ad Hoc Sewer Feasibility Implementation Committee to order. And I want to start by saying welcome everybody. See Mr. Adams back in the room today. We are missing a couple of folks in the room today, especially we're missing Sue Schneider, who could not be with us and could not join remotely. So we'll keep her in mind. Hopefully she'll be back with us next month. Before I begin in the agenda, I just want to kind of set the tone for what I'm hoping to achieve with the committee over the next 2 months. I would like for us, if at all possible, to complete our work by June, to be able to have a recommendation that's teed up and ready to be whatever the mechanism, if we approve it by committee and send it back to the full board, whatever that is. But I'm really trying to push us to get to that type of resolution. So today we'll discuss, as you'll see, we'll discuss the Lawrence's memo and how it lays out what needs to be done. I think we can add some more flesh to that maybe at our next meeting with a draft recommendation, and then be prepared in June to finalize something up. That's my ambition. I don't know that we'll get there, but I think we need to keep moving in that direction. So I wanted to lay out those expectations for this meeting today so we can keep moving forward. All right? So we'll begin our meeting with public comment, and I believe Mr. Adams would like an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. There was a discussion at last month's meeting about the way that sewer capacity was allocated in different areas. And during those comments, I got to thinking back on my observation and research of the way sewer service has been managed in Oconee County since back in the 1970s. It's my personal opinion that sewer service in Oconee County has been used as a political control factor as much as they provide our sewer services. And some may say that's in the past. I disagree with that. It's been more prevalent the last couple of decades, especially the last 7, 8 years. And there's several recent examples of that. The recent lawsuit against the county bond that was hatched right here in this boardroom. That was a pure attempt to politically control the sewer service. An attempt to deny infrastructure to an area of our county that's been identified for 40 years for its potential. Pure politics. There's another fairly recent example. And that's Sewer South Phase 2, the way that was handled, beginning in 2018, when all the funding for that came into place. That project was delayed for 5 years, resulted in a $7 million increase in cost. And from what I see, that probably had a lot to do with the regional feasibility study being commissioned by the South Carolina Rural Infrastructure Authority. That authority kicked in almost $1 million of funding on Phase 2. That grant had to be renewed, I believe, at least 2 times. And like I said, in the end, there was a $7 million cost increase. From sitting in these sewer authority board meetings, I really believe that this board thought they had Sewer South killed when that $7 million cost increase came out. They had it killed. Sewer service was not going to get to 85 like it had been discussed and planned for 40 years. But the county came together with several of the rural infrastructure authorities, some other sources, and came up with a fund. And it was finally finished. Like I said, the I believe the sewer south issue was a major reason for regional feasibility study. I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm not that detailed in it. But, if it weren't for that, we probably wouldn't be in here this morning. The point I'm trying to make, I know this is a somewhat subjective subject, but in your recommendation, some way you need to address the political factor that's been plaguing sewer service since the 1970s in Oconee County. Like I said, if it wasn't for that, I'm almost 100% sure we wouldn't be sitting in here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. You'll have, if you stay with us, you'll have an opportunity to comment again after our discussions this morning, if you so choose. I failed to recognize Norm. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group this morning for those that don't know you?
Most of you know me, but I'm Norm Canada. I work with the Journal in Seneca.
It's good to have you with us this morning. All right, so we'll move in now to the approval of the minutes, and hope everybody had an opportunity to read through those. I appreciate these are very thorough. In fact, Scott and I were telling one thing it tells us we talk too much. So, but I do think it shows, and I do. This is the committee is doing what they're tasked to do, trying to talk through things and figure this. So I do think it's a good reflection of that. So we have the minutes before you. Is there any discussion, changes that need to be made?
Just the one. Obviously, I'm from the south. Seated is seated.
What page is that on?
That's on top of page
5?
5.
Okay.
I'm talking about seeding assets, not seeding another table like that.
Any other corrections?
I want to just ask a question, because I think it probably should be noted on here. Chip, you were not at the last meeting.
I was not.
Correct?
Correct.
So the one thing I think, and Chip is a member of the committee, but not listed on here. So I would just feel we would include him as a committee member not present
Okay.
at that meeting.
And when he is present, we include him as a committee member. That is present, right?
Yes.
That's good. Any other corrections?
So when you approve these, I'll change this as,
We'll approve them conditional to the recommendations that have been made. In fact, I'll entertain a motion that we do that.
Actually, if I could do one more, just for clarification, on page 6, my concern was not having someone with knowledge, not, that we did have some concern. with
Okay.
someone. Just to clarify that.
It's good. I don't want to rush this. You guys take your time. Anything else we need to correct? So you got that, just to make sure that is worded in such a way that
Just to add the word knowledge.
correctly captures the concern. All right. Whenever you guys are ready to move forward, you just give me an eyeball and say. All right.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes with the 3 corrections as noted.
We have a motion, have a second. Any other discussion? All in favor of accepting the minutes, raise your right hand, say aye. All right,
and I'm sorry, who was seconding on that one?
Okay, sorry.
Scott. Okay, so now we're gonna move into our committee discussion and action items. Is, I think you wanna pass?
Yeah,
You got something to
got a
pass
lot of
out.
stuff to pass out.
So we'll let Chris passing things out. As you know, we discussed last time about revising Lawrence's memo to include consolidation of the sewer systems into the path forward. And so we have a summarized memo to support that. What else are you passing out?
These are
The changes to
the recommended changes to the statute. I believe these were sent to the committee members.
okay, so everybody's had a chance to look at this. Thank you. All right, so the first thing, let's review the summary of the memo, and from that we'll discuss next steps. One of the things I would like to do, and I'm gonna ask Lawrence and Chip and anybody else that wants to help step through this memo. Let's go ahead and with the thoughts that we're trying to finalize our work, at least move our work forward as we step through this. Let's identify what we see as major obstacles to the acceptance of this recommendation. So I'm not saying this committee will address all those, but I think as we formulate a recommendation, it would be prudent for us to at least acknowledge the challenges that may lay ahead, okay? And so let's get those documented, and now's your chance, is what I'm saying. If there's things that you're thinking, you know what, I don't know that my entity is gonna go for that, or it's gonna be a challenge, then I think it's fair to let everybody know, so everybody can go in with their eyes wide open what the challenges are. And so we can identify those things. I don't know that the committee can do a lot about them other than acknowledgement, and maybe propose some opportunities to help get through those things as part of our recommendation. But we need to identify those things and get them articulated and captured. So Lawrence, let's step through the memo. You tell us, again, just a summary of what it's telling us, any changes that have been made, and again, any obstacles that you see moving forward.
Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning.
So we can, this obviously kind of marries up with the draft language for the revised legislation as well, because when we met last time, this memo may look somewhat familiar, kind of, at least from the construction of it, because I took largely a lot of the language around the consolidation options from the last presented memo, but then incorporated various changes that came into effect as a result of the recommendations that the board made last week, largely around the constitution of the governing board. And so you'll see in the structure of the memo, the two kind of major changes were to pivot towards the recommendation, or at least the proposed recommendation and the direction that we seem to be heading, which is the idea of getting out of the treatment-only business, and taking over the collection systems of the various satellite sewer agencies that are currently members. And so the idea there of negotiating for the acquisition of the collection network of Seneca, Westminster, and Walhalla, and then potentially West Union as well, although they're not really addressed in the memo, but we've had some preliminary conversations with their staff. And so you'll see the same kind of recital on their outstanding debt, because that probably is the biggest hurdle outside of the political impact of getting out of the business, because the debt in most circumstances, and I'll admit I do not represent any of the constituent members as their own bond counsel, so we want to make sure we run the traps with their financial advisors and their bond counsel and their engineers to figure out exactly how you would decouple the system. But the general approach is that the debt is secured by a pledge of the combined utility systems. So for Seneca and Westminster, that would be water, sewer, and electric systems. For Walhalla, that would be the water and sewer systems. And so you need to make sure that you could decouple those assets without affecting the bonds. And that may require the redemption of certain debt. That may require the payment of funds necessary to redeem debt associated with the sewer system as part of the acquisition. And so that's kind of a moving target that is only addressed in a very, very high level in the memo, just recognizing process that needs to happen, but also laying out the foundation that the acquisition of those sewer systems can be sold and can be acquired under the terms of an ordinance of the respective members, because the referendum requirement that formerly existed in state law has been repealed under the St. George case. And then once you get into the process of making an appropriation and working through the politics and the practical effects of making that consolidation occur and acquiring the collection network, you then get into the more particular issues around the recomposition of the existing Oconee Joint Regional Sewer Authority, which is, I think, the direction that we've obviously discussed in times past. But the idea being that we would basically create new governance documents, new implementation documents, new debt proposals, and tighter parameters around how members are appointed. The largest thing that you're going to see here, and so we've obviously peeled out the discussion on the acquisition, but we talk about governance, we talk about an operating agreement. The main structure of that governance is going to largely focus on the success of the new legislation that has been proposed. And so the direction that I got coming out of the last meeting was that we still wanted to keep the 5-member proposed board. We thought that made sense. And as y'all may recall, the membership, or one of the recommendations in the W.K. Dixon report is to go to 5 members, adding Oconee County as a member. The problem that creates, and this is just by virtue of the way the statute operates, you have to have 5 members of the board. If we have a member from each of the existing constituent bodies and you add a member of Oconee County, that's only 4. And so how we come up with that 5th member. So our original proposal was to amend the enabling legislation to allow for a joint agency with a even number of proposed members to have the 5th member appointed by the legislative delegation, recommended by the legislative delegation and appointed by the governor. That obviously would solve the underlying issue of how you get to that 5th member. The open item still that needs to be addressed, and I think it was just alluded to in the recital of the minutes, is whether or not those members should be agents or employees of the entity. I think I've made my thoughts fairly clear, and I think other folks have too, that we believe that it is in the best interest of Oconee Joint Regional to have representation by members who are unaffiliated from a governance standpoint with the appointed bodies because of some fiduciary considerations. Basically, can you serve 2 masters? If you're the mayor of one city and you're also serving on Oconee Joint Regional's board, do you have the ability to think in a fiduciary capacity, acting in the best interest of Oconee Joint Regional, when you also have similar fiduciary duties to the membership agency? So that's an issue that still obviously needs to be addressed, and something that would come through the operating agreement. But in addition to that, we added 2 additional authorizations into the statute that we can discuss here in a moment. But at a really, really high level is the idea of getting rid of the membership appointment methodology kind of in its entirety. And so not allowing the members to appoint members, but instead having the entire board appointed by the governor upon the recommendation of the legislative delegation, basically moving into a situation where you kind of see like most special purpose districts appointed, and that would just be an election that the members made at the outset, that basically would devolve their decision-making authority on board membership to the delegation and appointment by the governor. Then the number of members may be less of a concern or consideration, although I think I certainly wouldn't recommend going any higher than 7. I think it just becomes very difficult to functionally operate a board with more than 7 members. And then the last option that I believe was recommended by Sue, because she comes from a situation where she had some ad hoc, some ex officio members and some elected members, was the idea of having a full-blown elected commission that would serve, that it would be elected from within the boundaries of the service area of the authority, which would obviously require the recommendation as an elector. So kind of 2 new methods appointing membership to avoid the situation that we currently have on those fiduciary limitations and the potential for how the additional members get appointed, in addition to the idea of actually acquiring those collection systems. So that's largely the biggest change that you'll see. And all of these options, at least on governance, are all explicitly conditional on the legislation being introduced and considered. So, the way that this memo presupposes a number of things being introduced through legislative amendments, basically on every one of the governance structures that we're otherwise proposing. There are some general cleanups in the legislation that we've talked about in previous committee meetings, but that is what's being proposed. So the kind of follow-on items from that are the same idea. Depending the voting mechanism, and Scott had some recommendations on what that looks like. Is it one man, one vote, or do we, for certain matters, and then weighted voting on financial-related functions? The idea of having weighted voting becomes less important if you have the membership elected from the service area writ large, or if you even have an appointed membership by the governor, where you don't have the constituent duties or the potential conflicts that would occur if you were an appointed member by the perspective or the respective governing appointed governing bodies. So the voting mechanism very well may change depending on the governance structure that is otherwise put in place. The expansion and debt parameters are the same thing that we've previously seen before, just what it looks like to potentially expand, and what it also looks like to pre-approve debt, which we had previously recommended that, knowing the capital budget is pretty significant for the organization, go ahead pre-baking some authorization and approvals to do treatment plant expansions and potentially now collection system improvements as part of the reconstitution, discussing what the process is for a new rate structure, which will obviously come from some of the Wildan reports. And so that's kind of at the really, really high level what this memo proposes. Identify the next steps that otherwise need to be taken in order for this memo and the general recommendations, as I understand them, from this ad hoc committee to be taken forward. And so that's obviously to make appropriate arrangements for the proposed legislative amendments to be filed, and we can talk about those here obviously in just a second. Engaging all the necessary professionals to start moving forward on this recommendation, and that's going to include engineers, rate consultants, lawyers, and financial advisors, largely around the conversation on how you redeem the outstanding debt of the current members as necessary to transition and convey those various collection systems. You obviously need commitments from each of the members to be able to do that as well. And then we probably want to put some deadlines in place to make sure all that stuff gets established. And then, just throwing more balls in the air of the kind of contingencies associated with whether or not this can be successful. You got to have the draft legislation approved. You got to have everyone agree to the authorization, and then we got to set forth a schedule for how implementation ultimately occurs. So I know that's a lot of information to kind of toss out there in one fell swoop. I will certainly answer any questions anyone has about the memo as proposed.
All right. Thank you, Lawrence.
I have a quick question, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Lawrence, it's Catherine. That third option that you were referring to that Sue kind of mentioned, the election of the new commission in a duly called election, just the way it's written, to me it almost sounds like it's the current service boundary as it stands today, but are you actually referring to the boundary by which a county joint can serve, aka the whole county as a whole? I'm just wanting clarity on that one.
No, and so this is actually a question that we want to run through legislative drafting, but the Constitution requires you to be a qualified elector in order to serve. And so the interesting question that we kind of will run into on this elected commission question is who actually becomes a qualified elector. Oconee Joint Regional doesn't tax, and so the argument would largely be you only have the authority to serve in the areas in which you're provided. You only have the qualification of elector in the areas in which Oconee Joint Regional is currently serving. because those are the folks that are ultimately affected by the business decisions that are being made. If it was a taxing agency and you had folks paying property taxes on debt or operations that were not actually receiving service, I think you can make the arguments that they're an elector, but that's not the service boundaries. And so the proposal here would be, and to the extent that needs to be clarified, the proposal would be, in order to be a qualified elector, and that's the way the legislation is ultimately drafted, you have to be a member or a service recipient of service from the Oconee region.
So how does that limit the Oconee County member then? Because that essentially means they'd have to be in a very tight area within Fair Play, or I don't know, along.
So Oconee County had designated funding for 18 years at $613,000 a year to the entire system. So not just Fair Play. It would have to mean all the upgrades to Martin Creek, Seneca Creek, because those are tax dollars invested in that current system.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like
The new map.
where this boundary is.
Yes.
And this is just a question I had, and I don't know if you guys had
No,
it too. But
we talked a little bit about that last time. Is there
Yeah.
a way to overcome that? And when you say that's a limitation of the legislation, is that the current municipal joint, whatever it's called, is it a limitation of that, or are there limitations outside of
No,
that?
it's a limitation of the Constitution, which says that you can only be elected to a position in which you serve as a qualified elector. And the problem is how you identify who an elector is.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking. I mean, and this is a question for you guys to figure out, but I wouldn't think an elector has to be somebody that's, because where I'm going with this authority is going to impact people outside the current customer base. I mean, it's not just what you do today, it's what you're planning to do tomorrow. So, is there a way to designate service territory? It may not be countywide, but it could be reasonable within the plans of service. There's you're planning for, can that be deemed the designated area? And
I think you could. I mean, the question is, it has to be designated. Right now, the way I have an elector described is an elector under legislation, which tracks some language from some of my special purpose district clients that have similar such arrangements. All commissioners shall hold the qualifications of elector. No, 1 second, hold on. Pulling it up here. Give me 1 second here, Joel. I lost my spot on my legislation. So.
it's okay.
Yeah, so an elector, basically, the way we've identified it, is that it's someone who is residing within the service area of the joint system. So I think you could, that's a question we'd have to kind of talk through with legislative drafting. The issue that we run into an awful lot of times is, especially in the municipal context. So, for example, if you're a city utility or a city commission of public works, which is probably the closest analog to this organization, they provide services outside their municipal boundaries by contract. You are not allowed to have a commissioner of public works that resides outside the municipal limits of the city, because the jurisdictional boundaries of that organization are limited to the city limits. And so we just need to make sure that for purposes of having the conversation, we identify exactly who qualifies as an elector. The way we normally do that is by tax boundaries. Here we're not going to have tax boundaries, so I think the way you have to do it is by service area where folks are actually receiving service.
Yeah, and I know it's a little different animal. I know in our SBD setup, being a regional, we have our service area defined and approved, but so we get representation for anybody that lives within the service area. They don't have to be a customer, but they have to live within the service.
That's correct.
That's a little different animal.
Hey, y'all, I know just enough about the lawsuit to be dangerous, but if you start chopping pieces of the county off, you're getting real close to causing a problem with the arguments they just made in that case.
Okay.
I mean, we had a whole list of countywide benefits that saved their bacon in that.
Except they're
It's
not
really
levying
kinda like the
taxes,
Blue
that's
Ridge
the
Electric
distinction
co-op,
here.
where if you get a bill, then you go through a drive-through
Hey.
vote.
Can I ask a question? This is like a chicken and egg question. So the legislative solution, you know, the governance side and then the money side, like what are these systems worth? On the legislative side, practically speaking, this can't happen until next session. Are we talking about which one we're going to ask the legislature to do? I mean, we're not going to just say do any of these three, we'll take it, right? I mean,
No,
Right.
the proposal is all of these are now options that would be baked into the statute.
Yeah.
And then we would get to
Okay.
decide, or the members would get to decide which option they chose to pursue.
And
Okay,
I guess
okay. So we could defer that. So who do we actually have? Senator Alexander or somebody with the draft of this? Like, where are we on that?
We do, so, we've had some conversations. Chris and I met remotely. Chris was in person with Chair Ronson, and we sat down and had the conversation with Senator Alexander and his legislative affairs, or I think his legislative drafting attorney. That was done prior to this most recent draft, because we obviously didn't have this draft last time we met. And so my direction was, in the aftermath of last committee meeting, was to put together some new legislation, and because of that timing and hoping to maybe get something introduced this session, just knowing that we have Senator Alexander, and if it can at least get introduced and maybe even have a subcommittee hearing, you'd at least advance the ball enough where you're not delayed into next session. And now that we don't have some of the crossover limitations, you could basically just have it, stop in the current position and then be picked up early next year. So this draft in its current form has been sent over to Senator Alexander and their legislative drafting folks, but was conditioned on, hey, this has not been reviewed or considered formally by the ad hoc committee yet or the full commission, but we want to let you know another direction that we were taking based on some of the new recommendations that have been proposed by the members of the ad hoc committee.
Well, I was saying, basically, I'm trying to order the critical path. We have three options here. Maybe any of these three will work. When this committee recommends to the full board, right now, are we going to recommend, I think you should go with this legislation and go with option 2? Or are we just going to say this legislation works?
Can I answer that? At least from my perspective, I'd like to hear from the residents. I don't know that we can. And the critical path is you've got to work out the consolidation and debt issue to find out if that's viable, to tell you what's the best path, I think, to go as far as the governance model. Until you figure those things out.
That's what I was saying. If the money don't work, then none of the legislative solutions work. So maybe critical path is, what are these systems worth? And part of that, Lawrence, I know you stuck out the debt on the constituent entities now, but there would have to be a figure like the county. The county has a good amount of debt with essentially, and I apologize if I'm wrong, but essentially no customer base.
Yeah, but it's supported by taxes, and this is a revenue-only system. And so you got to make sure, you want to make sure that they can support that debt, and that's that's part of the reason that this is a multi-headed hydra of complication. Every time you add kind of an additional layer, there are issues that otherwise need to be unpacked. If this was the simplest form of this is you take the existing board, or the existing structure, you reconstitute it, and the major issue that we've had for the last several years is kind of the competition among the existing membership, struggling to make decisions on how to apply rates and charges and assess costs among the members, because they're directly affected, and a lot of times you have this overlapping function where you've got fiduciary issues. As we've continued to unpack it, we realize the issue may be larger than that. There's also issues associated with how the system may be being operated, how the individual collection systems are being operated, and then you layer that on top of all of the underlying issues that you have with the fiduciary questions. And I think that's what moved us in the direction of making a little bit more recommendations on what the consolidation, taking on some additional legs. But the main thought here and all of the appointment side of this was drafted with kind of the broad brush of trying to figure out a way to solve the fiduciary questions. Because the thought was, if you could at least deal with those, the finances can largely follow it, because you don't have folks making decisions on the basis of other constituencies that are unrelated to the provision of sewer service. I think Joel would tell you, because folks like to say that you don't make money making sewer, you can absolutely make money in sewer. You just have to make sure that you set your rates and charges at a level sufficient to be able to recover those costs. And right now, that's not happening.
I know the money problem is, you could change the people sitting in the chairs, but the money problem's still there. 10,000 members, a heck of a lot of debt, and the rates are probably, the deferred maintenance is the other elephant in the room.
But I think to that point, Rivers, if you have folks making decisions to increase the rates to a level that you can afford to make those fixes, you have folks that have made decisions to make those fixes. And so you can afford anything if you're willing to create a rate base that supports what you're trying to finance.
I think Mr. Willett had a question or comment here.
It's almost like circling back around now. You had mentioned that Oconee County has debt with no customer base. Can I ask, just an inquiry, how is that debt being paid back? Is it
Right now with interest.
No, but I'm just saying, is it?
No, with property taxes.
Is it property taxes?
The interest we're earning on the bond itself is paying the debt.
Okay, how is it? Okay.
So increased property taxes by new users.
Okay, I'm just trying to see, what I was really looking at when you said the county already has debt, it's like if the county has debt and it's being applied as property tax countywide, everybody in the county is already, is in the tax base, so therefore you're not restricted because the county's a new member. So everybody in Oconee County would technically be an elector and eligible for service on the board.
So you've got an issue here because taxes could be levied on the basis of a general benefit, and without getting into the underlying questions of levying taxes for sewer service, if that is being done, it's like you can the perfect example is you pay property taxes for education purposes, even if you may not have children in school anymore, because taxes are levied for the general benefit and welfare of the community.
Yes, but I'm also allowed to run for school board without a child.
Correct, 100%, because you are a general taxpayer that that is an elector of that area, but it's because of your underlying tax levy. And so it's an ultimate question as to who we did identify as an elector. And maybe that's the way we handle that, is to add a definition of elector into the statute that makes it very, very clear. The issue you then run into is what happens if the city of Westminster's collection system, and I'm throwing this out there just to kind of let us think through everything that is out there. If their system then runs into Anderson County, and so then all of a sudden is the service area of Oconee County because you tax there, and then wherever you serve by contract in Anderson County, such that you then now have to have a representative from that area. So then the election commission has to pull folks from Oconee County and from Anderson County. It gets really complicated really quickly in trying to identify what that service territory looks like, or what that electoral map looks like.
So let me pause this right there. So I think that brings up a good question: are those concerns for the work of this committee? Is that stuff that needs to be figured out in implementation? I would ask the question right now: the three things that we have before us, that we have within the legislation, is there any of them that this committee thinks is unworkable?
I don't know that my council would support the first term of a board being completely elected, because that's not, okay, for instance, the district board, the Westminster seat, I mean, it goes all the way out to Long Creek, Georgia, borders north. half the district doesn't have any opportunity, nor future opportunity, because it's mountainous.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, the way these are defined, the three
Right, the
options are in it.
definition, no, principles, yes.
Yes, and that's what so
Yes.
can we agree as a committee, when we put this as a recommendation, can we agree that we're offering these three opportunities for further governance and representation? As a committee, we can recommend what we think might be preferred under certain scenarios, but are we in
We're not drawing
agreement
the
that
lines.
there's, yeah,
So is
if
this
these
a good
things
time
can be
to
worked
bring up my
out, we would
recommendation
accept
from the last meeting?
any one of these.
Sure, I've only heard it through the grapevine, but sure.
So after the last ad hoc committee meeting, and Lawrence, let me know if you can hear me or not, because this is gonna be directed toward you in a minute. After the last ad hoc committee meeting, we were talking in the parking lot, and I was talking about a compromise on how we thought that the municipalities, and I talked to Celia, I believe, in the car on the way home, and intended to call you. But, so there should be, and I'm not saying should or shall, but my idea was that could be the formation of what would be a transitional committee. So each of the members currently have the opportunity to appoint a person to serve as the transition person. Because going from what it is now to a stark whole new system is not palatable to a lot of people who are holding the purse strings. Primarily because the purse strings are the most difficult part of this organization. Of course, there's the whole serving two gods things, but essentially, you would still have your 5 members, and they would be staggered terms. For instance, and this is just an example of a definite, so the county seat would be 3 years. Each of the member cities could be 2 years with 2 consecutive terms. So there is an opportunity for a transition to occur, and when those initial seats weigh out, then you move on to that next structure. Because the transition does allow for the organization. The county, for instance, we've never actually had a seat. The county council is going to want someone from the county sitting in that seat to go from A to B. If that person just randomly is me, if I know that they're going to appoint someone in 3 years, I'm going to help them find someone in 3 years that can learn the county structure of funding, that can learn the county's position, so to speak, so that representation, without it being an employee or without the strings tied to the purse, there can be a transition from one form of government to another. I think a stark flip of the coin is going to result in there being less progress made.
I think that was directed to you, Lawrence, and or Rivers. Is that a possibility?
Okay. Yeah, so I would say theoretically anything is possible. The issue you got to get into is that that's going to require further manipulation of the statute because that's not currently contemplated. The way that this statute is currently drafted is it's assuming that you're creating an organization from scratch. I mean, every joint agency that's ever been created was created under the current version of it, which is that the members, make a determination to create this organization. They then file a certificate with Secretary of State requesting it to be created. They then go through the maturation process of making the organization occur, and then they appoint the members to otherwise serve. Mm-hmm. If you start continuing, so now we've theoretically amended the statute to change that process to allow for the appointment by a governor for, when there's an even member of the board. We now have an elected membership authorization. We now have an appointed membership authorization, and then we would have this separate transitional authorization that theoretically transitions the board, but doesn't solve any of those underlying issues that have created, the reason for going through this kind of fulsome process to make recommendations on how you proceed. So I'm not saying it can't be done. I just don't know the practical benefit of doing it that way.
The benefit of doing it that way is to allow for the transition. Starting from scratch is not something, I think that, and am I right or wrong are the member cities ready to flip a coin? No.
There's some details to work out on
Right.
handing everything over, but once those are ready, I think so. But that's gonna take time, like you said, transition time.
Let me ask it, let me put it a different way. Lawrence, you'd indicated that the Joint Water System Act envisions creation of a new entity. So you don't want to muddy the waters by putting in transitional stuff. What would be the difficulties in saying that, that the new entity is a forward creation, and using the existing entity and the existing governance to bring on someone else and make that the transitional piece? In other words, make it the last act of the existing and current joint water system to be the transition.
That's right.
And then on some forward springing date, you file your certification with the state, and there shall
That
be.
seems to accomplish what.
Yeah, well, can I comment on that? Because I think that hits to the heart of what I think is my biggest concern moving forward for the community, not necessarily for this board. Who's going to make that happen? Who's going to hold the current board accountable to get to that point? Who is the authority that's going to say, "Thou shalt do this"?
Well, so I would say, practically speaking, just to answer Scott's question first, and then to circle back to Joel. Practically speaking, Scott, that's exactly the way this would work, because you can't go through the reconstitution until you've addressed all of those outside issues. You've got to transition and convey the entire system to the organization. And then remember what we had talked about previously, whereas we're not creating a new system, we're reconstituting the existing one. That way you don't have to do deed transfers and all the additional kind of real estate work associated with transferring all the assets to a newly created organization. So we could, you would almost set this thing up so that all of these ducks are lined up. So before you actually pull the trigger, you got to know how much debt you want to issue to improve the treatment facility. You got to know how much debt you want to borrow to make improvements to the collection system. You have to know that you've acquired the entire collection network of the existing cities. They're going to have all approve the conveyance and transfer by ordinance to allow that to happen. And you could make all of that subject to a date certain and tie that to the recomposition of the organization writ large. This is not something that's going to happen in the next 6 months.
Now, it sounds like if it gets changes in the act wouldn't occur till next year, and it's probably wouldn't be unusual to stretch it for a year after the adoption of that before you had a springing date. So
I think it would take even if the legislation passed this session, I think it takes you several years to work through it. I mean, the closest analog that I can come up with was we went through the process of consolidating all the various fire and sewer providers in Greenville County into Metro, so that they picked up that collection network. Now there were some lawsuits associated with it that delayed the process, but that process kind of soup to nuts took almost 2 years.
So again, Lawrence, this is just where I don't understand. So where is the timeline baked into? What?
So the timeline becomes, y'all make your recommendation, and then once that recommendation is made, the impetus to be able to actually take some action falls back to the members. Now, the way that we've gotten to the place that we're in now is that the state regulators, including RIA, have basically said, you don't move forward on this and we're not going to provide you any additional state funding. So assuming the state continues to keep that level of pressure on the organization to make a decision to move forward, I think the pressure comes from the state regulatory side, not necessarily the local government side. But someone is going to have to stay on top of it. I mean, frankly, the reason that this has all happened is because Angie and her team were tasked with the responsibility of moving this thing forward. And I do have some concern that if you lose that leadership, it becomes somewhat of a rudderless ship.
Any comments on that?
Angie, I'm not saying that means you're going away, but someone has to be in charge. If
There needs to be a shepherd.
If the group's in charge, no one's in charge.
So maybe that's, and again, I don't want us to get out of our lane, but I do think as we make a recommendation, we can suggest some ways to ensure that implementation is successful. Right? That doesn't
And
mean,
to
it's
look
not
at
binding,
Angie to
but
be our rudder.
do what?
For the transition, we could look to Angie as an outside source to be our rudder.
Yeah, or somebody, that could,
And
and
of course,
again, I
the
think.
state requires a certain amount of accountability, but we're dealing with a lot of professional people who are also self-accountable. I just think it's very odd, and obviously I'm new to this, so, you know, the county's drive and the county's push, and I'm speaking for my council and why I'm here, was to get the county a seat on the board, not to have a wide open election for the county not to have a choice of who was gonna be on the board, when all along, all these seats have been hand-selected. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I hear where you're coming from, I just,
Yes,
again,
it's just that
I said my
perspective.
perspective from the beginning is the most successful systems are one where you don't have individual entities. You have ratepayers and they're all represented, and I think long-term, that's what you need to work towards.
But unless you increase the number of ratepayers, you're asking, what is it, 14,000? Did you say? At one meeting?
I don't know if it's that many, maybe 10,000.
Okay, so you're asking 14,000 people?
Well, we have
in a county
10,000
that's
customers, so
over
that's about
80,000?
20,000.
You know what I mean? Like,
citizens.
so that seems to be kind of inequitable in a way.
But we keep talking about the elected, but when I look at those three choices, the second choice is to me the most attractive.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm not sure.
And that goes
I'm not sure anybody in this room, if pressed, would say they prefer to see elected commissioners.
That's a fair statement, thank you.
So as a committee, do you recommend the second one when you send that to the board, or do you just give them the three options and ask the board to decide?
I think those are things, when we draft this up, we need to decide, how are we gonna,
I
Right.
think we need to say this is.
yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the options, having some weighting, based off of the members makes sense. Breaking the ties, that of answerability, I think is important, and I think the second option, to me, when I read it, it's the one that comes closest to doing that. Without it being just, a popularity an election is a popularity contest. Let's just be honest, of it. Sometimes you get the homecoming king, all right, and the homecoming queen, and they may have been really pretty and they're a really good football player, but that don't mean they know anything else, okay? And I would just suggest that elections, you know, elections serve a purpose. When you have a meaningful size, group that they're being elected to. For small groups, it often allows people that would not be qualified, based on knowledge, or even temperament, to serve in a seat. And with party of 5, that's pretty high risk. Only takes 2 that have an axe to grind that are popular, and suddenly you've got a problem. So, whereas having the ledge delegation or the governor, make appointments based off of the general lay of where the service is being done. We're gonna hope that their wisdom will rise, that your delegation will make recommendations to the governor that would be beneficial to the county and beneficial to everyone, as opposed to someone with an axe to grind. Or someone who owes their job to, you know, in the first instance, you owe your job, you owe your seat to your present employer. All right, so how do you vote on that one? You know, that's the rub y'all are all faced with now. You sit at this table, I'm making blanket assumption. You sit at the table based off of your present, your primary employment. You know, the cities aren't gonna reappoint you if, you know, you suddenly aren't loyal to your city first. So.
Lawrence, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to simply add to that. Remember, the way that legislation is currently drafted, whatever the appointment mechanism is, the existing structure, the appointment by the governor, or the election, the members reconstituting and forming the organization will ultimately have the discretion to choose which methodology it suits best. So I do think that to that point of, are we staying in our lane as the ad hoc committee? I would say if the goal here is to provide flexibility and give them options to be successful going forward, the legislation as it's proposed gives them the ultimate discretion as to how they want to proceed. And so I point that out to say, we can debate the good, bad, and the different. We could decide to strike out the elected option in its entirety and remove it from the legislation. But it will ultimately rest with the members who decide to reconstitute the organization, which option they think best suits them, because right now they have the flexibility to choose among any of them.
So I guess that goes back to what I said earlier. I think as this committee, we can provide some context and pros and cons around those. But I think, again, somebody else is gonna have to make that decision.
Yeah, I agree with
I've got my preference, but it doesn't help this.
Right.
So,
I think this committee is charged with making a recommendation. And I would have no problem making a preferred, this is what we would, or what, at least what, I hope that we can come together and say, this would appear to be the most logical or the most beneficial arrangement. Doesn't mean any of the other two don't work. And it is ultimately their choice. But if you're gonna be Chris in 5 years, which one of those appointment methodology is gonna provide you a board that is most responsive, and most independent? And I think that's what we have to be looking for. So a board that is gonna look out for the organization above all else. Not your city, not your county, the organization. That is the number one, that is the definition of the fiduciary. That's their job. And that's hard, it's a hard standard for anybody that owes their seat to anybody.
In theory, yes, but the fiduciary part is the membership. I mean, we're a board that's not affiliated, they're not affiliated with money either. Is this gonna be self-funded?
yeah, I mean, a successful organization is gonna be ratepayer
It's gonna be
funded.
ratepayer funded. It's not gonna be funded by the members directly anymore.
No, I
Your customers,
Sure.
but they're funding your organizations
Individuals,
now.
Collect.
But the customers, yeah,
From day one? I don't think I understood that.
That's who funds us now is
County
the
taxes are
customers.
still paying, right?
We don't
County taxes
know.
are not paying anything.
No,
How are you gonna do that financially? Doesn't the county have a $25 million bond?
Yes, we do.
So
That's
if the
just to run
taxes don't
sewer
pay for that, so if
Yeah,
the
so
taxes
that-
don't pay for that, the rates can't support another $25 million, can they?
So I think we're mixing concepts here, guys.
We
So
are.
The county has already issued that GO bond to run sewer improvements along the sewer south corridor of the county. That will continue unabated, and it should not be affected in any way by the consolidation that is being proposed here, because it is untethered to the asset. So the receipt of sewer service and a customer in sewer south has nothing to do with rates that are there. I think Oconee Joint Regional already plans to own that asset. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but plans to own that asset and will charge accordingly for it. That would be part of their regular rate base. The county, regardless of what option we take, will continue to have that GO bond outstanding and payable from the full faith credit taxing power of the county to continue to pay off that debt. That's basically an equity improvement that would be transferred over to the Oconee Joint. I mean, that's not to say Oconee Joint couldn't say we'll pay for it, but
Yeah.
I think that would be outside the considerations for what
But
is being considered as part of the
That's a critical piece of information, but
Mhm.
because I didn't know how that debt was handled. The other debt that's already on the table, though, still makes my eyes pop. In this interim, while we propose the legislation, can we get someone to do the financial case for, like, if we split this debt like this is what the rates would have to go to? Because that's ultimately what the power of the purse runs back to. How much is this going to cost?
So I think the way that has to happen, and this is the reason you can't do any of this without the existing members agreeing to it. The one thing I was able to identify, most of this debt, like for example, Walhalla, they only have that one series of bonds that I'm aware of that I was able to find from sourcing their audit, so don't quote me on it.
You're correct.
But it's the $20 million, $21 million revenue bond that they did a couple years ago, and that was exclusively done to make or expand their water treatment plant. So it is completely untethered operationally from the sewer system. Now, from a debt standpoint, the security for that obligation is the combined revenues of the water and sewer system together. So the reason that debt becomes important is it's not right now, you don't know how it's otherwise being funded, but frankly, the utilities should be operating on a component by component basis where one component is not subsidizing another component. For example, the water system should be paying all of the debt service on that Walhalla revenue bond without any reliance on the sewer system. Now, practically speaking, that may not be the way it's working. And so then you have to go through the analysis with Walhalla's bond counsel and their financial advisor to say, okay, can we decouple and sell off the sewer system without having to touch this outstanding revenue bond because we are diminishing the security that those bondholders are receiving? I think that's the way it is for a lot of the other utilities as well. It looks like Seneca's improvements are mainly water-related improvements and electric-related improvements. Westminster's improvements largely look to be the same. There are a few small sewer-related functions, like, for example, Seneca has an SRF loan for the water pollution control revolving fund, which I know is a sewer improvement. And so that's $4.7 million. They're servicing it now. They very well may be paying it off of their rate base from the sewer collection system already. If we acquire that, we probably continue to pay that as well. But that's the reason that this is beyond the scope of just the folks in this room. You're going to have to bring in each of their individual rate consultants, or at least have them agree that Willdan takes over and does that analysis. You're then going to have a financial advisor run the math on whether or not how you otherwise decouple that debt, and then their bond counsel is going to have to opine on whether that debt has to be redeemed in its kind of full capacity, or whether or not you can decouple that component under their master bond ordinance without having to redeem the debt. And so all of those things are going to take an awful lot of time. And then on top of that, you probably also need independent engineers to be able to make sure that the system, and I would assume that this is the case, but that the system can otherwise be, could be accommodated, that you convey all these systems over, and a Oconee Joint Regional can actually run the service network, as a interconnected system. And so you've just got a lot of additional third-party diligence that needs to get done, even once you make a recommendation. If all the members said tomorrow, yeah, this sounds like the greatest idea ever, you're still a year from being able to make a decision on how you actually move forward, because I think this is a really heavy lift.
But listen, this is ultimately what I'm driving at is, do these constituent members think that the Oconee Joint's going to write them a check, or do they think they're going to unload $10 million of debt on them and say, take it?
I think that's a question of how you value the systems.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm saying is the critical path.
And I think you have to have an engineer that goes in and says, okay, or a consultant that comes in and does an appraisal of those systems, because some people would also make the argument, and I think Andy can speak to this probably as cleanly as anyone can. If you pull up the audit financial statements and you say, well, what's the depreciated book value of the assets, and I'm not picking on Walhalla, but they have no debt outstanding on their sewer system. So you're easy because you only have one series of debt outstanding, but they have no debt outstanding on their sewer system unless they're doing pay-go capital in the sewer system, and it was built 50 years ago. That system is fully depreciated. So then the question is, there's no asset value on paper. So then what are the customers worth? Well, are the rates at a level where the system is actually making money? So then you do an analysis to say, okay, are we going to value this on some forward earnings ratio? It's a nonprofit sewer system.
It's got to be an enterprise value. That's the only way you can do it. And then you got to put something down for what's the deferred maintenance number,
which is then going to undercut whatever that value is going to be. And so I think the only way that this thing works is you're probably going to wind up in a place where the systems are all going to have to just be granted over into Oconee Joint, and and someone is going to have to really dig in deep.
And so again, in the interest of time, because I know we have another meeting coming up a little after 11, I think that goes back to what I said earlier, where this committee needs to wrap up their work. And part of that recommendation might need to be that, all right, you need to determine who's next to continue the work of the recommendation, because the easy stuff's getting ready to be over. The hard stuff is the implementation.
That's right.
And so, and again, all these things that have to be figured out, somebody's gonna have to take the lead and make it happen. They're gonna have to have a reason to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the committee's at the point where we can recommend the path forward and make sure that the playing field is set for that, like the legislation and everything, but some of these are gonna have to be done, you know, it's beyond us, and the sooner it gets started, the quicker it goes.
Yeah. So I think those are great points, and I do think that's, you know, the debt issue is one that needs to be jumped on immediately. Figure out what the value of those systems are, what would this look like, so you can move forward.
And if it's financially feasible for each one of the member cities to make the move.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
Well, let me, just so I understand and maybe make it clear for others as well. So based on what you said, in reality, if you took in the assets themselves and whether there's any value to them and add in on top of that the deferred maintenance, technically, I guess, I don't see it happening this way, but in those cases, those entities might have to transfer funds, basically pay somebody else to take their system. Is that a different way to look at it?
you're undermining what we're trying to achieve.
You might as just.
But no, I just want to make sure that I follow what he's saying, that there's no value or a negative value. Is that in?
In theory,
They're
the
liabilities. The systems
Yes.
in their current condition are
Brand new
liabilities.
systems and liability.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, from the get-go, what do? You start planning on what you gotta spend to maintain it and rehab, so it's a liability. The only way for this to work, for everybody to come together in good faith to try to come up with the best solution, you know, and if it all comes down to economics, you're never gonna get there.
Lawrence, can I ask a quick question as far as the bonds? You're talking about the sewer system tied in with the water. I know in a lot of, I think in most cases, sewer is subsidized by either water or electric or both. Would that, taking those off the books, would that not actually improve the position or the comfort of the bondholders? So that liability's gone?
That's absolutely the case, but that's the reason someone has to do the analysis to make that determination that it is actually not dilutive but additive.
Yeah, that's.
Well, talking with our bond council already, it's gonna have to be voted on by the shareholders, and it will be up to them on making that decision, or the bondholders, excuse me, on whether or not they wanna do it. So it might not be left up to a city, it may be left up to whoever is paying for that
I
bond.
would think as long as it's presented accurately to them, they're gonna say, yes, please, take this
You
away.
would hope,
I would think,
but
because
that particular decision, in some cases, is gonna be out of our hands regardless, and we can present the best case, but ultimately someone else voting on that.
And so without getting too deep in the weeds on that, if that's the circumstance, then you'd actually have to redeem that debt if you couldn't get consent. And then that becomes a question of who is responsible for issuing the debt. And then if there's no, sewer related improvements, you reissue as a decoupled system, that would either do water and electric together, or water as a standalone entity because you no longer had sewer, and then it becomes a credit question. And so it's either getting consent on the front end or going through a defeasance or redemption in order to be able to make it work. So you've got a bunch of moving parts to be able to make that successful.
Well, the other question I have, you said you're a bondholder. Where'd you get the bond? You go to the market, you get SRF, where'd you?
It was through market, wasn't it? Wasn't it market, yeah?
$5,000 nomination sold and won't to a bank, or it matters because I mean if you had to get the approval of everybody in $5,000 increments for $17 million, you're talking
a lot.
Yeah, it's a refunding. It's not a permission. Whereas if it was SRF, it's like, okay, call down.
Yeah, this was all open.
Trust me, they'll approve it like yesterday because they're pushing this. That's why.
Yeah. And that's the reason you got to talk to your own individual bond counsel, because, for example, in my standard bond ordinance, we have the authorization to decouple a system to the extent that you determine it doesn't materially affect the interest of the bondholders, and you do an additional bonds test determination outside of the consent requirements. But not everyone has the same documents that I do. So it's going to be unique on every single situation, and you're going to need to get that advice from your own individual counsels for the members that are in the room that have debt.
Well, instead of getting too far into the details of things that this ad hoc committee doesn't really have control over, how about we say, okay, recommendation is that we would like for the member cities to see if they can consolidate, check, we've done that one. Next one, I don't think that I can support option number 3 at this time. 1, 2, you know, whether we want to decide on 1, whether you want to give the board 2 to decide from, check, and then let's keep moving down the list. Because we've got 2 more months and we've only got about another 40 minutes right now. We got to keep moving.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your help. You can tell who's getting billable time and who's not.
From the looks of our minutes, though, we get paid by the word.
We must. But that's exactly right. And again, so I think you don't want to speak in a few minutes. I'll make sure I give you time. All right, make sure I give you time. So, is there any other discussion on? Do we feel like we have as a committee what we need to tee up a recommendation? Again, does it consider consolidation as a priority to look at? I'm not saying we can force it to happen, but do we feel as a committee that that's something important?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
And so that will be part of our recommendation.
Yes, I mean,
Pursue that.
You've met
We
with
can-
all the cities we've all talked to.
Present a change in governance, and we can talk around what those options are, and whether that's 2, 3, 1, I don't know, but I mean, we can finalize that in the draft. I think we might draft something up that has all 3, and we can decide, you know what, we'd rather just take this one out because it just muddies the water and it impedes our ability to progress. I do think we need to include, any major hurdles or obstacles that we see in the recommendations, right? And I don't know, Chip, you can tell us how many. I don't want to lay out a recipe or a task list, but how in depth do we go? And we need to probably discuss that. That may take some iterations, right?
Yeah, and we can talk. I think next time as we flesh this out a little closer for the group to talk about, we can look at who moves these forward, who's responsible, what's that timeline, who carries the ball here, and kind of.
Do you feel comfortable,
those
Chip,
eventually.
based on our conversations today and last time and hearing from them, that we can kind of put the list of those things? Hey, these are things you saw people go, raise their eyebrows about that we need to consider, or
Yeah.
the full board would need to consider as part of implementation.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it would be out of our lane to recommend some type of transitional process that would help assure that this moves forward and it is completed. We don't have any control over that, but I do think for this to be successful, it's going to have some kind of framework that says, all right, this is what you need to do and this is how you can proceed to get there. To hold yourselves accountable, whatever that looks like. Because I just see this is hard work.
It is.
And everybody has a lot of other work going on, and if it's not made a priority and somebody's not watching over and holding accountable, then I don't know that it ever goes anywhere, to be honest with you. I'm speaking. And that's not a criticism. I mean, that's just
reality.
It's just reality. That's the way life works. So I think as a committee, or y'all agree with that we need to help
Yes.
recommend in some way? And Catherine, you may have some great ideas to help the committee, you and Angie, on what that might look like.
Sure.
Okay?
They may be our bus drivers.
That could be.
We are both very type-A.
If you ignore her email, she's like, I emailed you.
Yes, Scott.
She's never done
I've
that.
only got one comment. When I was looking over Lawrence's recommendations, it continued to talk about some pre-authorized projects that would be pre-approved. My personal experience with pre-authorized, pre-approved projects that are written into a contract that are then turned over to a new organization, or that they are almost a death sentence. Our one of the major items at the formation of our system was project that was envisioned as necessary at the time. Everybody was sitting around the table, much like this. And upon formation of our system, for the first 5 or so years, it likely could have been the one thing that would have dissolved the system. It would have had the members all suing each other. Because what was envisioned at the time, sitting around the table, wasn't necessarily what was, and it was contractually required. So you had some members saying we have to do it because it's required. It's part of our permit. And we had others saying, no, it doesn't make sense. And we had others saying, why are we fighting? And I'm just gonna suggest that the cleaner you're able to make the handoff to a future board to allow them to make fiduciary decisions that are in the best interest of the system at that time, the better you're gonna be. Don't try to force future boards and future councils or whatever your commissions, whatever you're calling this, don't try to force them into things that they may find not palatable, that results in more problems.
Mhm.
I mean, that's
a great point.
It's very sage.
I would recommend the same, that there's no bait to it. I mean, I think Lawrence talked about it. I think you can handle a lot of stuff with just the right service level agreements and understandings.
Yeah.
But when you start baking in future expenditures, you're creating an opportunity to fail.
Not that
So
we
let
would
me-
do
let me
it, but
just
that
briefly
could
touch
make
on
the
that,
board
guys, and
go
the-
ahead and
and the
start
reason
holding
that the
the
language
conversation
is in
and hand
there
over.
is you gotta remember, unlike, and Scott knows this, but unlike the special purposes for folks, debt still has to be approved by the constituent members. And so you can't delegate that function. And so the thinking was, we have a pretty robust capital plan. If you're going through this full process anyways, you're gonna need to know what you need to know for capital. If you're getting the approvals on the front end, it's a lot easier to go ahead and get that approval for the debt. So you can go ahead and issue that initial series of debt as needed without having to go back after the fact. And then that will allow someone to hold hostage.
And I hear what you're saying, Lawrence, but I would agree with Scott. What you've identified in that capital plan will not be the same need you'll identify in 5 years. Life changes, the world changes, and if you bait those into projects, then you're probably going to end up spending money that you don't need to spend or need to spend it on other things. So,
I think you're also, unless I'm mistaken, you only really need to make that pre-approval if you go with governance model number 1. Do you still have to do it if you go with governance model number 2 or number 3?
We did add some language in there that gives a little bit of flexibility on debt. That is correct.
And that would seem to tilt the table in preference of your
make
governance
note of
model.
that for the recommendation.
Mhm.
All right, any other comments on what's been presented and talked about today? I think, again, when we come back in May, I think we need to have something in draft form, where we take Lawrence's memo and amend that into some type of recommendation. One question I would have, I guess, for Chris or others who on the board is, what is the deliverable that the board is expecting? Is it just a written recommendation that we ratify and give to them? Do they want any type of presentation? And so just, I don't know. I don't know. You know, if they want to keep it as orange, they just want us to hand them a piece of paper, that's fine. I want to meet expectations from a committee standpoint. What is what they're expecting, and how can we achieve that? So you guys think about that.
Joint meeting, one presentation,
It could be.
Probably wouldn't hurt. I don't know if it's explicitly expected. I mean, definitely written report. It might not be a bad idea to have a joint meeting just
With
so
all this
there's
And we might can leave. We
a
can
conversation
come to
to
an
explain.
agreement and with our recommendation. I think we need to be in
If we were
agreement
all
before we
together.
present it to
Yes.
them, right? We don't want to get in the room and leave it open
No,
for
no.
this and that. So maybe we give it to them with the option, if you would like to have a joint meeting to discuss this recommendation, then we can do that.
I think at a minimum, a presentation be good, just so there can be a follow-up to any questions they might have.
And I think that's at their discretion for what it is and the timing. Is that July? Is that, I don't know. And
Yeah,
so
right.
you guys just think about that.
I thought it was more specific in here, but it just states that the committee will report back to both the OJRSA and Oconee County. So it didn't specifically call out for written
I just
report
think a joint
or
committee
a.
would be nice, so they know how many
presentation.
meetings we had, how many things we hashed through.
I agree.
We're not all like side-by-side partners, and this is the first time.
Well, and that's why I'm asking this committee. I would
Yeah,
like, because you guys are gonna have to live with this thing, so whatever you think helps.
Yeah.
That's what this committee should support. Any other questions? I mean, did we leave anything unsaid, undiscussed on the memo or the legislation? I don't know that we need to have any other discussions with Senator Alexander as of yet. He's got what's been proposed, and knowing it's not gonna probably go to session at the earliest until the fall.
And I don't think we need any changes to what you put together, Morris, from that
Okay.
standpoint. Just leaving all the options there is fine.
Yeah, so we've got enough to move
The
forward.
only thing I will do, and I just sent Jeff and Joel an email, and Chris, and Angie actually as well, just put in there, do we need to add a specific definition of elector for the elected version, and do we need to expand the debt authorization for a gubernatorial appointed board? Because right now, as it's drafted, it only applies for an elected board getting to bypass the membership approval.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, we'll give that consideration. And we'll obviously allow everybody to deliberate that with the draft if we change the language, okay?
When that language is changed, will you send it back out to the ad hoc committee, Lawrence?
I just sent it to y'all, and just put questions on the sides, just as a comment function
Okay.
for further consideration. If y'all decide you want it added, we can work on some language to address that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay? Anything else before we move on to public comment?
Could I suggest homework?
No, I hate homework.
Well, just because we've got 2 more meetings, can we look at these 6 things that are listed in the memo and each come back with what we feel we can support and just discuss that? We're just going through the memo again.
Okay,
Okay.
so is there a way to open, I know typically we talk among, can we open it up for the group to
Yeah.
provide a mechanism for some feedback and comment?
Yeah.
So we're all working off the same document. So y'all think about that, Chip, if you
So
would.
those are- yeah.
Like a shared doc.
Yeah,
Yeah,
some
we
kind of
share
shared doc, if we
and
could
we
put
can-
it.
You want people to see their comments as they put them in?
I think we need to do
Okay.
that between now and
Okay.
I
finalization.
mean, even if we just bring it back at the next meeting,
Yeah,
just so we're
whatever.
prepared and not.
As much as we can get done ahead of the next meeting, I think it'd be, so if we have comments, if we can get
Right.
those incorporated, let's do that.
Okay.
Specifically, we're just talking about the bottom half of page 3 and the top half of page 4.
next steps.
Just those 1 through 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Good point, thank you. All right, anything else?
Working on budget.
I do want,
Exactly. I hate this right
Hey, give me homework.
if we have no other comments, Lawrence, Rivers, you guys good for us to move forward to public comment?
Good here.
All right,
Thanks, y'all.
thank you guys
Thanks,
for
guys.
your help today. Mr. Adams, give you an opportunity to.
To me, the most interesting comment made today was the fact that you can make money on sewer service if you jack your rates up high enough. That's not very customer friendly. I'm not a customer, but I could be. The way to mitigate that is to add customers. And that has not been done satisfactorily in Oconee County. The way to do that quickly with industrial customers that you get your big sewer bills from. That's been very lacking. Matter of fact, we lost multiple big sewer users in Oconee County. Globalization. They hadn't been replaced. And most of the focus has been on lighter industry without large sewer needs. But I know that really doesn't enter into this work of this committee. That's another thing that's impacted this. If it hadn't been for that, we might not be here today. That's my comment.
Thank you, sir. All right. So our next meeting will be on May 8th, So do we have anything else we need to wrap up, comment on?
And is that date still good for everybody?
Is that date still good for everyone? I don't know, I'm retired, I'm sure.
Let me check my calendar.
Yeah, let's,
It's,
Yeah, it looks
Aw.
good.
Oh, well, I guess that's worth recognizing is we have two very, very recent retirees
I'm
or
still,
soon
I'm
to be
still employed for another
retirees.
2 weeks. Looking for a job, if you know anybody.
Congratulations on
Maybe we'll
a
try to be
career
creative
well
for somebody
done
to
for
shepherd
both
this.
of you.
Do what? No. Obviously, I've disqualified myself.
Start consulting and hit these guys.
You know, I tell everybody I've got a lot of experience and very few skills, and it's hard to market myself. It really is. But I appreciate that recognition. So appreciate the work of everybody. I think in the last couple of meetings, we've really made some good work, and it's good to hear everybody give input. This is something that some of us are not. I would say we're not. I'm getting emotionally attached to this, right?
You are?
Yeah, I want to see you guys do well. I mean, I really
You'll
do.
have to stick around.
I wish my county of Pickens would take on something like this and try to get their act together. That's a whole other story. But this is one of those things that changes the
Yes.
community, right? It's impactful. And so this is good work that you guys are doing. So
I think you need to note that you're talking about your personal county of Pickens and not where you work.
right. My residence count. My residence count. So anything else before we adjourn? Any other housekeeping we need to do? We cover everything?
I think we got everything.
All right. So I hear a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Third, seconds, thirds, and fourths. All in favor, leave. All right.
Bye, Norm.
Thank you, sir.